It's good to be back. This is the third time for me. And for those of you who heard me a few weeks back, you know that I've got these computer glasses on, so I can't see any of you. But I can see this. I guess that's a good thing. I want to talk about the subject today that is one that is very, very important because of the fact that today, evolutionary humanists who are in control of the public education system use dinosaurs as a way to teach our kids from the time they're little all the way up through high school and college and university that the dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. Everybody knows that, right? And teach them that evolution is true and all that mumbo jumbo in the Bible is not true. Because they've proved that the dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago, that means the Bible can't be right. And of course, that's just not true. But we're going to go into that. Have you ever wondered what it is that dinosaurs did when they were alive? Or maybe I could ask the question different. Have you ever wondered what they would do if they walked across one of our major highways like I-26 or something like that? Of course, they'd make a mess, wouldn't they? Why? Because our world is not set up to deal with these great beasts. If they were running around today, of course, we could learn to make provision for that. But let me ask a question. How many of you here this morning believe that this is a life-size model of a once living dinosaur? Raise your hand. I see a few hands. You know what? This is a life-size model of a once-living stegosaurus because when they all started out something like this. See, the largest fossil dinosaur egg that the scientists have ever found is about the size of a football. So yes, this is a life-size model of a once-living stegosaurus just before or just after they hatched out. Now, you're getting ready to go up there in a couple weeks to the Creation Museum. This was made by a friend of mine, Buddy Davis, for the dinosaur den in the Creation Museum that, indicates that they were very small when they hatched out. But today we have a different conception about dinosaurs. You see, we think they're big and they're mean and they're nasty. And they're running around trying to eat or sink their teeth in or rip apart anything they can get a hold of. Now, question is, why do we believe that? Or why do we think that if we don't believe it? And of course, it's movies like Jurassic Park, right? How many of you saw Jurassic Park, the movie? Jurassic Park 2, Jurassic Park 3. Let me see that. How about the latest two? Jurassic World, and they got about 5 of them now? Folks, it's a lie. That's all it is. It's a movie. I got a chance to speak out on the island of Hawaii, Oahu, and on the big island of Hawaii several times. And I snapped this picture when I was out there. I like taking pictures. And the reason I snapped it is because if you move the camera one frame to the right, there is the log from Jurassic Park. It's just a movie set. It's not real. But you would be surprised how many people teach their young kids that it's true. Or young kids believe that it's true because of watching these movies. It's awful. If you move that camera one frame to the right and snap another picture, there is the log. There's the footprint from Godzilla. Many of you see Godzilla? Oh, yeah. Well, this was when the scientist was running across the Central America towards the beach, and, there was a ship on the beach with the claw marks on it. And he goes down in this big track, and the movie camera pans up, and he's down, and there's the track right there. I actually got that cow to lay down for scale just before. No, I'm just kidding. Come on, have a little fun here. What I'm trying to illustrate is this right here. You see, here we have the scientist. He's in the white lab coat, of course, right here. And he's saying, in my expert opinion, these dinosaurs were fighting just before they died. And this one had a hold of that one's tail and so on and so forth. And over here, we have the artist. He's painting a picture of what the scientist is describing. Now, here's a simple question. What does this have to do with this? And the answer is nothing. What's the scientist looking at? He's looking at a pile of fossil bones. What's the artist painting? He's painting a live action shot. One has nothing to do with the other. And so when you see pictures of dinosaurs, these renderings, these artist conceptions, and that's what they are, you need to remember that. I mean, that one on the upper right looks pretty real, doesn't it? But these other ones down here look kind of hokey. Now, that tells you how old I am. You haven't heard that word in a while, have you? Oh, wait a minute. There's a team up here somewhere up in Virginia. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend anybody. But you can tell that they're just artist conceptions. So when you see these renditions of these great animals, remember, they are artist conceptions. Somebody thinks that's what they might have looked like. And, of course, they've gotten very good at it over the last 15, 20 years with graphics. When you look at some of these things, they're quite interesting. Now take a look at here, some real pictures. This is a mummy of a duck-billed dinosaur on the left. That's a big problem for people who believe in evolution. You know why? Because mummies cannot survive more than a few thousand years. They crumble and turn into dust. And so that mummy of the duck-billed dinosaur could hardly be 65 million years old, or 6,500,000, or 650. See, they have a problem with the zeros. They have too many zeros on the number. Now, a woman over here in North Carolina a while back got to looking at some fossil dinosaur tissue and everything, and when she broke it by accident, and inside they found red blood cells, soft, elastic tissue that when you stretch it, it would snap back like a rubber band. What was her reaction? Oh, my goodness. I can't believe that this soft tissue survived for 65 million years. And, of course, that's true. How in the world could it do that? It couldn't. When you look at some of the pictures we have today of dinosaurs and dinosaur tracks and everything, they're quite interesting. These are the Paluxy River out in Texas, central Texas. That one on the left is pretty interesting. Trackway coming. This is a size 24 human track in the same strata as a dinosaur track, going the other way. Take a look at that one that popped up last there. Do you notice anything there about this one? Look closely. There is a human track down inside the dinosaur track. See the human? Here's the big toe, little toe. Explain that one to me. Obviously, the human stepped in that dinosaur track shortly after it was made, and obviously before it fossilized. So when we look at these things, these are all evidence of what? Evidence that humans lived at the same time as dinosaurs. Here's a picture here of my son, Dr. Falling and I. Of course, you know T-Rex, Sue the T-Rex is one of the most famous. Dr. Falling and I are in the picture coming up. This little girl climbing on that fossil wall at Dinosaur National Monument, she had a hold of a vertebrae. Did you see how big that vertebrae was, that fossil vertebrae? Dr. Falling and I had a good time when we were out there looking around. Of course, you already know Dr. Falling he loves fossils. That's his thing. This is a picture of my son, Cyrus. He's about 6 foot. He's standing next to that femur. That's the bone from here to here. As tall as he is. So obviously, they were very large, some of them, but not very many. Now, I want you to just understand that the Bible really can be trusted beginning with the very first verse of Genesis. And so most people kind of want to know the answer to what I call the four big questions about dinosaurs. Number one, they want to know where did they come from and how did they get there? That's kind of a compound question. Two, when did most of them die out and become extinct? How did most of them die out and why did they die out and become extinct? So if you're going to try to find the answers to these questions, you can go to a couple of different explanations. Scientists who say they know everything about these things. You know, these scientists, they teach in our universities or right on down to our elementary schools. They are looking through a magnifying glass at the evidence for dinosaurs and coming from a worldview that teaches that millions of years of death, disease, bloodshed, and struggle, that's what brought dinosaurs into existence. That is what they base their interpretation of the fossil on. Now, these people that I mentioned, they're in control of the public education system. They've written a bunch of books for kids on dinosaurs from that evolutionary worldview. And they've written more of them for kids. And they've written more of them for kids. And then they've written a bunch of them for middle school, high school stuff. And that's just the start, people. You see, we need to understand they use that like bait on a fishing line to hook the kids and reel them in and teach them an anti-God worldview called evolutionary humanism. And they've gotten really good at it. Still a lie nonetheless, but they've gotten really good at it. So when you look at this information through that magnifying glass of evolutionary humanism, you draw certain conclusions about the evidence that you're looking at. And of course, this millions of years of death, disease, bloodshed, and struggle is all wrong. Why? Because it says that life came from non-life and it evolved over millions of years. Let me give you an example. How many of you know what aluminum is? Most of you. Okay. Let's say that I had a chunk of aluminum in my hand right here, aluminum ore. Question, does aluminum fly? And the answer is, of course, no, it doesn't. Well, how about if I melt that chunk of aluminum down, stretch it into a long, fat tube, put some wings on it, it flies. Boeing calls this particular piece of flying aluminum a 747. Now, I want you to just do a little mental exercise with me here. Now, remember, it's just mental. Reach into this picture here and just take a hold of that engine pod and take that engine pod out and look at it real closely, turn it around. Does the engine fly? No. All right, reach in here. Let's grab a hold of the wing. Take the whole wing. Turn the wing around. Think about it. Does the wing fly? And the answer again is no. All right, one more question. Reach up here into the cockpit where the pilot is. Take the pilot out. Look at him. Does the pilot fly? And the answer is no. So don't think about this next time you go to Tri-Cities Airport or down to Charlotte to get on a plane. But an airplane is a collection of millions of non-flying parts. Not a single part of the airplane flies. Now, the question is then, what makes the airplane fly? It's called creative design. You see, millions of human beings figured out how to engineer all of those millions of parts. Other human beings figured out how to design and make them and build the tools and dies to manufacture the parts. Millions more human beings figured out how to assemble the whole bunch into a system. Somebody taught the pilot how to fly it. I think that's a good thing. And together, the system flies. It's called creative design. And the same thing is true with life and human beings. Dr. Denton talked last week about the complexity of the human body. It's amazingly complex, far more complex than this machine here. And so when you look at these two worldviews, what you see is a worldview that teaches That's looking through the magnifying glass, or I like to say looking through the pair of glasses, evolutionary glasses, and they're interpreting what they're looking at through that worldview, and they come to a conclusion. The other hand, you can look at it through a different pair of glasses, a different worldview that teaches that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And you can come to a completely different conclusion about the very same piece of evidence. And that's what we're trying to do here this morning. Somebody might think, okay, how are you going to fit dinosaurs into the Bible? Because that's what we're here to talk about, right? The answer to that is you don't. I don't have to fit dinosaurs into the Bible. You know why? They're already there. All I'm going to do is use the Bible to explain dinosaurs within the biblical worldview. What is that? About 6,000 years ago, God created the heavens and the earth. Then he created everything else from that material in 6 days, culminating in a day of rest on the seventh day, and that included the dinosaurs. And so, do you remember that slide I put up with the main questions? Where do they come from? How did they get here? When, how, and why did they die out and become extinct? And that second question, there's an interesting word in there. When did most of them die out? We're going to circle back to that in a little while. So if we're going to do this, we need to take our Bibles and we need to look and see what the Scripture says. Because it doesn't matter what my opinion is. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. It's a matter of what God said. And in his word, in the Bible, he told us exactly what he wants us to know. There's a lot of things I'm sure he did not tell us. And I'm looking forward to getting up to heaven one day when the Lord either raptures us or I go to the grave. And I'm going to ask him a bunch of questions. And believe me, I got a bunch. So you turn to Genesis chapter 1, verse 24 and 25, where we want to try to answer these questions. And we read there in the 24th verse, and God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle, and creeping thing, and beast of the earth after his kind, and it was so. I love the way God puts that. He said it, and then it was so. He said it, and there it is. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and God saw that it was good. Now, when you look at the Scriptures, and we could do more presentation, I'd love to do that sometime. I do one called Why Question Biblical Authority, because we have Christians question the authority of God's Word all the time. Well, did it really mean 6 days that he created? Could it have been 6,000 years, And we go into all these gyrations. Look, God said what he meant. And according to the genealogies of the Scripture, so-and-so begat so-and-so, and he died, all those passages you try to read at night when you can't go to sleep. And you add them up, and the Bible indicates that God created the heavens and the earth about 6,000 years ago. Now, somebody say, no, wait a minute. It doesn't say dinosaur. It didn't say he created dinosaurs on day 6. And you know why that is? That's because in the King James Version of the Bible, it was translated in 1611. Hundreds of years before they found the first dinosaur fossil. So, of course, the Bible doesn't call them dinosaurs. What does it call them? It calls them dragons. And in the Bible, you will find the word dragon. Dinosaur, if you would, in a number of places. We're going to go to a couple of them and talk about them for just a second. First one is found in Job chapter 40, verse 15 to 19, where he says, behold, now behemoth, which I made with thee, eats grass as an ox. Lo, now his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are strong as pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief in the ways of God, the largest animal, land animal that God created. So when you look at this particular passage, people, and I'm talking about people who study the Bible and everything, have tried to come up with a lot of ideas about what behemoth was. In fact, C.I. Scofield, who wrote a lot of notes for the Bible, says that that this was an elephant or a hippopotamus. If you have one of those Bibles and you look down at the bottom, look at his notes. Well, I have a problem with that. I mean, look at that verse. He said, he moves his tail like a cedar. He's talking about the cedars of Lebanon. Cedars of Lebanon were as big as the California redwood trees. Anybody ever seen an elephant with a tail like a redwood tree? I don't think so. I mean, if he did, he had to look something like this. Big-tailed dinosaurus elephant. By the way, that's my term. Nobody else uses it. Don't try to Google that. It ain't there. I don't think, anyway. What's wrong with that picture? Elephants don't have a tail like a cedar tree. But a Brachiosaurus, a long neck type dinosaur, does. The Bible's talking about a Brachiosaurus. And it says he's chief, the largest in the ways of God. Of course, that's the biggest fossil they've ever found of a dinosaur. Another big problem that people have is that they say, well, wait a minute, take T-Rex, for instance. He was a meat eater, a flesh eater. He just ripped everything apart. Now, I've seen some of these fossil teeth. Dr. Gary Parker, a friend of mine, has a couple of them. They're about 7 inches to 8 inches long. That's some big teeth. But the question at hand is, do big teeth mean a carnivore, a meat eater? Well, it could, but not necessarily. Let me take a look at this picture here. Now, you know what these are, a lion and a tiger laying down next to each other. You probably don't think much of that. They're both big carnivorous cats. But how about tiger cubs suckling on a pig? Or how about piglets on a tiger? Folks, there are animals on the planet today that we think of as carnivores that do not eat meat. That's the way it was in the beginning. God created everything after its kind. He gave us the green herb and all of the plants and vegetables for food. He didn't give us permission to kill animals and eat them for meat. That didn't happen until after the flood. We could go there if we want. But people still think, wait a minute, T-Rex is the greatest carnivore of all time. Of course, until Jurassic Park 2 and Spinosaurus tore him up. Y'all remember that, right? Take a look at this skull here. Now that looks pretty mean and nasty, doesn't it? Now, if I was to take this and give it to a forensic sculptor and say, look, I want to know what this thing looked like when it was alive. Put some skin on it, put some eyeballs in it, a tongue, put some hair on it. Let me know what this thing looked like when it was alive. That person might come up with something like this. Now, that looks pretty mean and nasty, doesn't it? Sure wouldn't want to meet that in the middle of the night out here in the woods, unless you had a really big gun. But you know what? That is the skull of a camel. And a camel is a vegetarian. It doesn't eat meat. Now, could a camel eat meat if it got hungry? Sure it could. What was the 4 big questions? Where did they come from? How did they get here? They were created by God on day 6 of creation week. And that happened about 6,000 years ago, according to the Bible. Now, when did most of them die out and become extinct? You see, God created the heavens and the earth perfect in the beginning. There was no death, no disease, no bloodshed. Man's sin brought death, disease, bloodshed in the world, and the world was cursed because of it. God warned him. God warned Adam, the day you eat thereof, thou shalt surely die. And the day he ate of it, he died spiritually. 900 some years later, he died physically. He died both. But I want to fast forward from that very first week of creation, about 1,650 or so years, to another event called Noah's flood. It says that God told Noah to build an ark, and Noah did build the ark. It's kind of interesting because Scripture indicates that Noah worked on it for about 120 years, preaching the whole time. He didn't have a single convert, except for his family. I don't know if I could do that. That's a long time to be preaching. Because when God had that door open before he closed it, anybody could come and enter into that ark. But they didn't. So God said, behold, all flesh has corrupted itself upon the earth. Behold, I'm going to destroy them with the earth. And he brought that worldwide global flood. Now, when those animals came on board the ark, you need to think about, when you read the scripture, Noah did not go out and round up those animals. They were brought by God to Noah. All he had to do was let them on board the ark. And when you go up to the ark encounter and you look at that in a couple of weeks and you see the way that our people have tried to figure out exactly, well, good question, how in the world did those people, there weren't very many of them on board the ark, Noah's 3 sons and their wives, 8 people, how do they take care of all those people, all those animals on the ark? I mean, they were on the ark almost a whole year. You're going to see answers to a lot of those questions. But the point is all Noah had to do was open the door and let them on board the ark. Now, a lot of people have a problem with that. Get out of here. Are you kidding me? 2 of each kind of dinosaur on board the ark? There's no way. We get ridiculed. We get laughed at. And the reason is because they have a total misconception of the ark. You're going to have that corrected if you have that misconception. See, this is what they think the ark looked like. It's the party boat. Everybody's having a good time and everything. Folks, there was not a party going on. Believe me, everything outside the ark was dying. Everything that had the breath of life. And that ark, of course, when you get up there and see that in a couple of weeks, it's almost 2 football fields long. 3 decks from one end to the other. It's a tremendous museum. And they have world-class displays in that thing. Do not short yourself when you go there. Stop. Smell the roses, so to speak. In other words, read the placards, because the whole biblical story is there. Now, a lot of people say, all right, two dinosaurs on board the ark. How in the world could they possibly have gotten, 2 T-Rexes or 2? Well, first of all, they didn't have to have 2 of every variation of the dinosaur. For instance, take the ceratopsia kind. Triceratops, of course, up there in the upper left. That's our favorite. But there's a number of different ceratopsia variations, just like we got a whole bunch of variations in the human kind, whole bunch of variations in the dog kind, and so forth. They didn't have to take 2 of every variation. All they had to do was take 2 of the pair, the male and female, that best represented that kind. And remember, God was the one that brought the pair. He knew exactly what pair he wanted there to reproduce after they got off the ark. Secondly, they did not have to bring 2 full-grown T-Rexes. All they had to do was bring 2 juveniles. That would have been a really big favor to Noah, wouldn't it? Having to deal with some of those. And then, there's a number of other reasons we don't have time to go over. But believe me, the dinosaurs died in that worldwide global flood. That's the second greatest catastrophe of all time. What was the first greatest catastrophe? When Adam sinned and broke the world. That's one of the things I've got on my to-do list when I get up to heaven. I'm going to go around. I'm going to go find Adam and I'm going to grab him by the throat and say, what were you doing back then? You messed everything up. And then, of course, I'm going to have to ask his apology, because if he hadn't done it, I would have. It's just one of those things I'd like to, I've got a number. But it's the second greatest catastrophe of all time. Now, if you are a secular humanist who do not believe the Bible, who don't believe there's a God, if you don't want to believe that, you've got to come up with some explanation as to what happened to the dinosaurs. The Bible says they died out in the worldwide global flood. Everything that had the breath of life in its nostrils. So if you don't believe that, you got to come up with another explanation. I'm going to give you a few explanations from these secular humanists who don't believe in God. And when I do, I'm going to have a little fun with it. So you got to lighten up here a little bit. One of them says that Volcanoes blackened the sky, so all the vegetation slowly died out because of lack of sunlight, and they slowly starved to death. Another one of these PhDs says, no, you got it all wrong. The food supply was so plentiful on the earth at that time that they just ate and ate and ate until they bloated up and died. Another one, and of course most of us are familiar with this one, they say that an asteroid or a comet impact slammed into the earth. That's what killed all the dinosaurs. And the one that tickles me is this one here. Well, no. They started eating one certain kind of plant that gave them severe gas and indigestion, so they died of gas and constipation. Of course, the really funny one is this. They died from lung cancer from smoking. They smoked themselves to death. Like I said, you got to let me have a little bit of fun. No, they didn't die that way. But you know, the one that really gets me is the one they've been teaching out for 20 years. They say that they didn't die out at all. They simply evolved into birds. That's the most ridiculous of all. I mean, they've been teaching this to the kids in the movies and stuff that they see. Let me see if this clip will run.
Each one of these layers would be a chapter in our history. And by taking samples from the various layers, we can know what happened. We can verify Darwin's mutability of species.
Evolution.
Precisely. Because each layer contains the fossils from a particular time period. By making comparisons, we can see changes that occurred over millions of years.
Like seeing one species turn into another millions of years later. Like dinosaurs to birds.
Well, folks, there's no mystery about what happened to the dinosaurs. They died in a worldwide global flood, just like the Bible said. And it accomplished exactly what God intended. He said, behold, I will destroy man with the earth. And that's exactly what he did. Let me see if this will run for us. Hopefully it will. When you get up to the dinosaur den up there at the Creation Museum, you may be able to see this clip and some other ones. The Bible says on that single day, the rain was upon the earth 40 days, began and upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. He broke up the fountains of the great deep. That's where we believe the real action was. That mid-Atlantic ridge all the way around, looks like baseball stitching on the planet in the bottom of the ocean. Ripped it apart, ripped it open, created a tsunami. You talk about a tsunami. Could have been as high as 500 or 600 feet. And tsunamis move at 500 miles an hour, the speed of a jet aircraft. It would have gone all the way around the earth, going both directions, in less than 24 hours. There would have been no running to get out of the way, no time to build a boat. If you weren't inside that ark, and everybody except those 8 was not in that ark, they all died. Pretty sobering when you think about it. Oh, I'll do this, I'll do that. You know, we always have a way of putting things off, don't we? I won't worry about it till it's right on top of me. The Bible clearly teaches that the flood of Noah's day covered the entire earth. Now, if there really was a worldwide global flood like the Bible teaches, what evidence would we, living in 2023, what evidence would we expect to find out there scientifically that shows that worldwide global flood? I'll tell you exactly what we'd expect to find. We'd expect to find billions and billions of dead things buried in sedimentary rock layers laid down by really fast-moving water, and we'd expect to find it all over the earth. And that's exactly what we find. It's called the fossil record. The fossil record is not proof of millions of slow evolutionary change. It's proof of a massive kill on a global scale. And that's exactly what the Bible says it was. Let me see if we can look at, we may have looked at this video before, but let's see if we can take a look at it from an airplane over all of that area, around that circle. Starting in Monument Valley. From a small airplane, only 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet up, you can see so much stuff that indicates that whole area out there was destroyed. Call it a second catastrophe in the American West after the flood, because when all that water was running off the earth, the mountain ranges and continents were uplifting. All of those erosional lines and everything moved to the west, of course, which is the west side of the United States continental divide. And I know a number of you have been out there. There is so much to see. Always interesting to me, all the stuff that modern man decides, oh, that was terrible that we built those dams. We need to destroy them so the fish that's down below the dams in the Grand Canyon and the river and everything can survive. Never mind all the millions of human beings that depend on the hydroelectric power from there. There was a huge coal plant that the Navajos built near Page. They've shut that down. Those are resources that I believe clearly indicated by the scripture that God gave to us for our use. Now, I didn't say mismanagement, I said for our use. Every continent has major erosional canyons like this. Even the island of Kauai in the Hawaiian Islands has a major canyon called Waimea Canyon. When all this stuff was going on and being eroded and things, there were not very many humans on the planet at that time. They'd gotten off the ark, they built an altar, sacrifice to the Lord, thanking him for his provision and for saving them. They were given the same command that God gave Adam: be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. And so they began to do that. It wasn't until many hundreds of years later, we don't know for sure how long, before they started discovering some of these things on the North American continent. Of course, we now have to address the question, if dinosaurs were on board the ark, and they were, according to Scripture, then that means that dinosaurs got off the ark. The question is, what happened to them? What happened to the ones that got off the ark? Let me just run one more clip real quick. I was going to run it last week, and it did not go. It did not have any sound. How many of you have been to Zion Canyon? Zion Canyon National Park. Of all the national parks out there, this one's my favorite. I know Grand Canyon's very much overwhelming. But Zion Canyon, unlike Grand Canyon that's 20 miles wide or more, Zion Canyon is very narrow and very steep, sheer 1,000, 2,000 foot walls. It's a great hiking canyon. I think my days of hiking Zion are probably over now. Although up here, I think I can still do it. I can still fly the airplane over it, but I don't think I can hike those 2,000 feet up. This checkerboard mesa coming up, a geologic anomaly, according to evolutionary humanists. All the cross-bedding with the lines going in different directions. You look closely up here, you'll see a bus getting ready to go into the Zion Tunnel. But those sheer walls are thousands of feet high from the bottom of the canyon. Very close and very tight. Most recently, the way I'm flying that airplane in front, my friend is flying the Bonanza in that particular clip. The Mormons discovered, of course, what the Native Americans had already discovered a long time before that. But when they went in there, they named a lot of these things like the Court of the Patriarchs, 3 mountains, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They had one called the Altar of Sacrifice, another one called the Great White Throne, named after biblical things, which I would much rather have than Temple of Vishnu and all these other names that they've got in Grand Canyon and stuff. Looks like we're going to fly right into that cliff. There's so much erosion in this area that it literally looks like islands up here in the sky, if you can imagine water up close to that level like a lake. I call them the hidden inaccessible canyons. The only way you can get up on top of these things are if you're a technical climber. Or you're flying over it in an airplane or maybe a helicopter. You could probably land on those with a helicopter. Spectacular things that the Lord has left us to see that speak truth to the fact that He indeed did destroy the world with a global worldwide flood, just like He said He did. Some of you may have heard of Angel's Landing. That's 1,000 feet above the bottom of the canyon, and where I'm taking that picture, another 1,000 feet above that. Standing on Cable Mountain right there. Observation point. Spectacular views. If you get a chance to go, and in particular, I think ICR, maybe AIG is now running tours out there to that area again. Maybe you could get on one of those. Here's the real question. Let me just end that. What evidence is there that dinosaurs lived at the same time as people? Now remember, dinosaurs were not recognized to have existed until the 1800s when they started finding fossils of these great beasts. Now, that simply means that any mention of dinosaurs, remember the Bible calls them dragons, any mention of dragons prior to the 1800s is evidence that people saw them. Is there any such evidence? Well, yeah, there is. There's an account of a knight of King George encountering a dragon, killed it, went back and told the king. It's written down in the historical records, and from the description, it sounded like a stegosaurus. Many of the capital cities in Europe have statues made. People have a habit of making statues that commemorate famous events, don't they? Or famous people. Of course, in this country, we got a whole bunch of people trying to tear down all of our historical stuff. Well, I don't need to go there. But for instance, the statue of St. George and the Dragon in Stockholm, Sweden is one of them. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, there's an encounter between a dragon and a human. The Chinese people, they have all kinds of legends about dragons with large gold-colored eyes, teeth, horns, everything. Now remember, the Bible calls them dragons. We call them dinosaurs today. It's like they're looking at each other in the mirror. It's the same thing. So when you hear dragon, think dinosaur. When you hear dinosaur, think dragon. Now, how many of you have been to a Chinese restaurant? We have several of them around here. Okay, most of you have. When you sit down and you eat Chinese food, what do you got there on the table in front of you? You have a version of the Chinese zodiac, don't you? You have the year of the horse, the year of the snake, the year of the dragon. Question. Simply a logical question. Why would the Chinese put 11 real animals on their zodiac and one mythical animal? See, I don't think they were mythical at all. I think the Chinese were living with them. There's all kinds of dragons that they talk about. Then, of course, in Chinese culture, it is a big privilege to be born in the year of the dragon. Let's talk about one more dragon, found in Job chapter 41. Its name is Leviathan. This was a fearsome animal. He was an aquatic animal, so technically he wasn't a dinosaur in that sense. But he was a fearsome sea dragon, let's put it that way. And if you take time to read that 41st chapter of Job, you'll see that it describes him as having smoke coming out of his nostrils. His eyelids are like the eyelids of the morning. Sparks of fire go out of his mouth. In other words, he was a fire-breathing dragon. It says in there that when he swam through the sea, he left a hoary wake like a cruise ship. He was big, really, really big. And of course, people say, come on, fire-breathing dragon, get out of here. You got to be kidding me. Well, some of you may know this, but we actually have an excellent example right here on the planet alive today. We have him here in the Smoky Mountains. It's called the bombardier beetle. This little bombardier beetle, right near his rear end, he's got 2 chambers. And then a third chamber right here. The 2 different chambers, one contains the chemical hydrogen peroxide, the other I can't even say the word right. Dr. Steve could, he's a chemist. Hydroquinone, I think is the way they pronounce it. 2 chemicals. And when something attacks him, he squeezes those 2 chemicals into that third chamber, and there's an explosion of hot gases at over 212 degrees, fire, out his rear end. In other words, God gave this little animal a protective cannon that he can shoot at will. Not only that, he can aim the cannon. Take a look at this. Some of the things they get on photography now is amazing. In this particular clip coming up, this spider decides that he wants to eat this little bombardier beetle for lunch. Like I said, he can aim it. Now, that's right. See, this is showing how he shoots it in slow motion, but it's actually very rapid. The spider is going to come up to him. Well, I'll just let the clip speak for itself. Here's the spider. Here's the bombardier beetle. Oh, I'll have a bite of that. Bam, just blows him away. A fire-shooting bug. Now, you remember the hadrosaur dinosaurs? If you read anything about them, they got that big, long, bony crest. Dr. Duane Gish, one of the 3 founders of the Institute for Creation Research, said, seems to me maybe in that bony crest he had a couple of chambers in it that maybe had the same 2 chemicals or a slightly different chemical. When something attacked him, he just opened his mouth and fire-breathing dragon. Why not? We got examples on the planet today. Out in the American West, where I love to go, and I've been there lots of times, there's all kinds of petroglyphs and pictographs. Petroglyphs are chiseled on the rock. Pictographs are painted on the rock, usually found inside caves because weather destroys those over a period of time. They've got these dragons, dinosaurs, all over the place out there. As a matter of fact, they've even got petroglyphs out there and pictographs of flying dinosaurs, pterodactyls, pterodons. Question: how did these Anasazi Indians that lived on the American West and then disappeared about 1,000 years ago, how did they know what these things look like? I've had some interesting observations in Canyon Diche. I noticed in that canyon, all of the cliff dwellings are about 100 feet up, or a little bit more. Why? Well, if you had one of those Brachiosaurus dinosaurs walking around, wouldn't it make sense to build your house up higher than they could walk on it? Or knock it? Well, never mind. That's just speculation on my part. Who am I? The point is those people were living with them. You go to northern England, another example, the Carlisle Cathedral. You'll find the tomb of Bishop Richard Bell. He was buried slap dab in the middle of the cathedral. The English did a lot of that with their famous people. Unfortunately, they buried Charles Darwin, I guess, in Westminster Abbey. The point is, he died in 1496. You strip that piece of carpet back, and underneath it you'll find a long brass plate, several meters long. And engraved on that plate there are animals with long necks, spikes on their tails. In other words, dinosaurs, dragons. You go over to Southeast Asia. I was raised in Southeast Asia. My parents were missionaries to the country of Thailand for 10 years, 52. We came back in 1962. I was 12 when we came back. One of the times they took me across by British Land Rover to Vietnam, a town called Dalat. I went to school at a missionary boarding school in Dalat, Vietnam. And that was back in the 60s. The French were still in that area, but they were pulling out. And one time he couldn't afford the plane ticket on the DC-3 for me to fly from Bangkok to Saigon. And so they took two British Land Rovers, and we drove across Laos and across Cambodia and into Vietnam, into the mountains. And driving through Cambodia, we came across a place that now is a big tourist destination. It wasn't then. It was still covered a lot by jungle. It's called the ruins of Angkor Wat. And engraved on the frescoes of that ancient temple, we find things like this Stegosaurus. Another example that people lived at the same time as these things. What were the four questions? Where did they come from? How did they get here? When, how, and why did they die out and go extinct? Let me just use a couple of graphics. They were formed by God on day 6 of creation week. Then, 1,656 years later, they fell. At the end of that week, when Adam sinned, they fell. So they were fallen like mankind. 1,656 years later, they were destroyed in a worldwide global flood called Noah's flood. But not all of them. There were 2 of every kind. They got off the ark just like all the others. So when they got off the ark, they began to fade from memory. Now, what happened to the ones that got off the ark? I'm not sure. I'll just give you an example. I think it makes sense to me. I live up in a country in the mountains here where people do a lot of hunting. And so those animals get off the ark, and men were given permission after the flood to kill animals and eat them for food. Behold, now I've given you everything to eat. So I think men probably started hunting them down and using them for food. More particularly, if you get an animal, say a T-Rex, that begins to threaten your kids and your wife and your society, what are you going to do? You're going to kill them. You're going to take them out. Up in this country, what do the hunters do? They go out there and they try to kill the biggest buck they can find with the biggest rack. And then they mount it and put it on the hearth above the fireplace, and they lie about it for 20 years. Just kidding, in case there's any hunters here. But my point is that I think, even today, the Eskimos, they have their annual whale hunt. They go out and they try to kill the biggest whale that they can find because they use it for food. I think men, particularly when they understood the T-Rex, maybe that particular kind, was a threat to them and their kids and their family, they hunted them down and killed them. And I'll tell you, humans got a brain, and they could figure out real quick it's a whole lot easier to kill a T-Rex when he's small than when he grows bigger and bigger and bigger, isn't he? Anyway, they were found once again in 1800s when they started finding fossils of these great beasts. And all the speculation began to run rampant about these things. You see, what you've got is you got the scientists in the white lab coat saying, hey, the earth is 1 billion years old, just take my word for it. On the other hand, you've got God saying in his word, I created it in 6 days, take my word for it. The point is, you got to take somebody's word for it, don't you? Because I wasn't there. You weren't there. Nobody alive today was there when God did all this stuff, when all this stuff happened, so you got to take somebody's word for it. Now, we've got just a few minutes left. Let me ask a question. Do any of you have any questions that you would like to address to me or ask me about some of the stuff that I talked about? Third time's a charm.
Test one.
Ooh, we're hot now. Now you're hot.
You fixed it.
I mean, the mic's hot.
The evolutionists will say that the rock layers show eras of time. Now, would you unfold that? What are they thinking? Different types of fossils in those layers? And why does that prove that they're millions of years each and that kind of thing?
The answer to that,
In their mind.
the answer to that, it doesn't prove that they're millions of years, each layer or between the layers or so forth. I had that demonstrated to me very graphically. I did a tour with the Institute for Creation Research to Grand Canyon back in 95, 96, somewhere in there. And I had a chance to interface with Dr. John Morris, the president of ICR at that time, and Dr. Dwayne Gish. But we were on the bus in Phoenix getting ready to leave Phoenix, where we all flew into, and then run the bus. There were two buses up to the canyon, South Rim. And as the bus was getting ready to pull out, somebody hammered on the door of the bus. And so the bus driver stopped and opened the door, and this man came in, and he was talking to John, and kind of an accent I had a hard time understanding. It turned out his name was Dr. Guy Berthaud. And he was French. He had been working at the University of Colorado, I think it was Colorado, or maybe it was Colorado State. But they had started running a bunch of experiments in what they call rapid stratification. And they had built a pretty long tank there, and the exact specs I don't remember, probably longer than this room by a long shot. And they started, and the way the experiments were made was they would start water flowing down through that tank, same level. It would drop off the end, the pump would haul it back, and it'd cycle it. And then at the end, they would start dumping 5-gallon buckets of, I just use the word aggregate. Everything from fine silty sand to larger grains of sand, pea gravel, anything up to about that big. And that water was rolling pretty rapidly. And as they kept dumping that in, they saw two interesting things. One, as a matter of fact, you may be able to find a video of this on the Institute for Creation Research website. But as the gravel went down, they noticed that the smaller grains, the larger grains, the medium, they all dropped out of the flow at a different rate. And so it was literally laying it out, going down through the thing. You can see it in the glass. And every one of those different grains of sand size laid out in a different layer, but all being done at the same time. That led into the discovery at Mount St. Helens. And when Mount St. Helens blew back in 1980, that in a matter of a very short period of time, I think less than 48 hours, when the side of the volcano collapsed, the Toutle River carved out a gully 600 feet deep in the ash layer that the volcano was laying down. And in that, you could see all of the same stratification, the same layers. And so I think most of the scientists believe that I mean, in the simplest way, I'm not going to try to give a scientific explanation, just something to help understand it, that, at least for me, that some animals can run faster than others, some animals can burrow through mud. I mean, in other words, you're going to find different animals in each layer depending on what type of animal it is. And I think the most telling thing for me was the layers at that large cliff they found down in Peru between Calco Canyon and Lima, where there's, I think it's 2 or 3 dozen species of whales, all found buried in the sedimentary rock layers from 300 feet deep, all in different layers and different species, all swimming in the same direction, like they're all trying to get out of the way of maybe a big tsunami coming, and the sediments overtaking them, burying them in situ, and that's where they're frozen today. So I think that this idea that they put out there, that we've got all these layers, and this is this, Pliocene, Miocene, Precambrian, all of these different layers, that is a human construct to try to give a plausible sounding explanation how all of this stuff could be millions of years old. Never really understanding that all of this stuff, like Dr. Guy Bertot's experiment showed, could be done in a matter of minutes or hours. And I think that's the explanation. One of the things that people forget sometimes is the Institute for Creation Research and Answers in Genesis both have an absolutely tremendous, and if the right word is library, of books, technical articles, technical journals, video clips that demonstrate what the article is saying online, that you can go on there and click around to your heart's desire, and it's free. They even have a way that on both of those ministries on their website, you can actually type in a question like that, and they'll have one of the scientists respond to you with as technical an answer that you might want. Most people don't realize you can do that. Now, a lot of those scientists are out doing field work. Some of them are out speaking in churches and universities and stuff. So you may not get an answer immediately, but I think 80% of the questions are answered within an hour. So please avail yourself of that service, if you want to call it that information availability if you want to. Another one.
Back in the back.
The other thing we thought was amazing at the Creation Museum was they ran carbon dating tests after Mount St. Helens. And the carbon dating came back that it was ancient, but it just happened in our living memory.
Right.
So that was the first I'd ever heard that carbon dating could be called into question.
Well, and also the radiometric dating. They used that, and it dated it, some of that at 1 million years, and it happened less than, what? Well, it's probably 40 years ago now? Yeah, about 43 years ago. I can't believe I'm old enough to have lived through a lot of that stuff. I don't know about you all, but the years just keep on going by. Go ahead.
One thing that regarding the dragons that was presented, which I found astounding, was the 2 reports, and it's on the wall when you first come in. There was how the Romans had reported killing a flying or a dragon, and took measurements and took the head back to Rome. So that's an historical reference. And then in Tombstone, Arizona, there was a report, it was reported in the newspaper, 2 cowboys were coming through, and they downed this flying dragon and went back, and then they got measurements. So that's an actual report from the Tombstone in our very recent 1840s.
Yes, that's true, and there's many examples of that. I showed you a picture of one of the petroglyphs of a flying dinosaur, the pterodon. The Indians called them thunderbirds. And the last recorded historical, if I've got the date right, of a thunderbird being killed out west was about the time of the Civil War. So we're only talking about 150, 170 years ago, we had flying pterodons out in the American West. I keep hearing reports now from the island of New Guinea, from Indonesia, about flying fiery serpents. Of course, the Bible talks about them. I keep waiting for somebody to come out with some more empirical scientific evidence. They have, the behemoth is one we could talk about in Africa. They think they may have some of those living in the swamps in the Congo. Still today. They're not as big as they were before the flood because of the fossils we found, but they're there nonetheless. And if I recall the historical account I read, that when they went out researching that, some scientists went back to England and reported this, and they thought it was just a bunch of baloney. So they just didn't even pay any attention to it. Somebody else ran across it 75 years later. Oh, this sounds like this might be a dinosaur. So they started research. So they went back to Africa, and the natives said, yeah, Mumbeli, I can't remember the way the natives call it, but they asked where they could find one in the jungle, and the natives said, go where there are no elephants. I mean, interesting stuff. What would they do if they actually found one? I know what would happen. If somebody ever found one of those things and filmed it and videoed it, CNN would say, here's another photoshopped whatever, That doesn't happen. Yeah, go ahead.
I had always heard that dragons in the Bible represented Satan, and I read this morning in Revelation about the dragon being Satan. So are there different Hebrew words, some that mean the dragon is a dinosaur and some that mean the dragon is evil?
That's a question for a Hebrew linguist. I'm not one that speaks Hebrew, so I can't answer that for you. But I believe there is a what's the word I'm looking for? A variation in the word or the context, one of the two. But yes, the Revelation definitely calls the dragon waiting there to devour it's some interesting pictures that come out of that book. Are we living in that time? It sure seems so sometimes when we see what's going on. Yes?
One of the things that Jerry and I have come across is one of the scientists that we were listening to was talking about when you look in the fossil records, that the complexity of the creatures, they're a complex, they're not a simple form, they're complex, very detailed.
Right.
And I thought that was interesting. And then Steve Austin, on one of the videos that we have, that is Genesis history, when he talks about in the bottom of the Grand Canyon, that there's no sign of age between the different layers, and it looks like the water, when it was draining and coming through, that it planed across, and as it came across, it was starting to settle. And Jerry can explain more of that, working at a wastewater treatment plant, when the water is coming through the trough area, I don't know what it's called, but if you don't keep the water flowing, then the grit in that, starts to settle.
Starts settling, building.
So it's fascinating, to see the complexity of these creatures in the different layers, but no sign of age. And even the secular scientists agree that there doesn't seem to be, any sign, of that. And they still haven't found transitional fossils. Which I thought.
Yeah, the idea of transitional fossils, of course, is an absolute must for them. Because we've got to explain how you get from particles to people. And you got to explain a lot of different times, to get there. Steve Austin, you mentioned him, been a friend of mine for years and years. I've been down in the Grand Canyon with him 3 times, I think. But back when ICR started a lot of this, Steve Austin, the first time he met him, was doing some serious research in an area called Nautiloid Canyon, which is up at the east end of Grand Canyon, right where the breach of the Little Colorado breaches into the main Colorado. And he found nautiloids. Now, nautiloids is a cone-shaped marine creature, like some of the shells that we used to pick up in Thailand on the beaches when I was a kid. We called them ice cream cone shells. But so they're cone-shaped, but 2 to 3 feet long, about that big around, and he was the first one that found these nautiloids in the canyon. So he got some pretty good, I don't want to use the word notoriety, but he became well known throughout that, the scientist culture in that area. And he found if this is in this layer, that means we should find nautiloids in the same layer down here. And he did indeed find them. And he made a very interesting observation. These nautiloids, 2 to 3 foot long, on one end they've got all the tentacles and everything. Of course, the soft tissue's gone, but the shell is still there, fossilized. Almost 99% of them are all oriented in the same direction. Like they're hanging on to the bottom or this whatever, and the water's rushing past them and finally overtakes them, and they're all buried. Not every one of them, but 99% of them all oriented in the same direction in Grand Canyon. They find a lot of fossil trackways in Grand Canyon, where animals look like they're running along the bottom or trying to hang on in the fast-flowing water. A lot of interesting stuff that the Grand Canyon and all of that type of stuff is best explained by a worldwide global flood. Not some millions of years of slow, gradual seas, and back and forth. Even the evolutionists are starting to realize that explanation they use does not hold water. They won't go with the biblical explanation, but they're acknowledging that they have a problem. Anybody else got a question?
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Let me make one more comment. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Then I'll let you have it back. When I went down to Peru to speak in churches down in Lima and around that area, in Huancayo, and flew up to Cusco and spoke in churches in the university up in Cusco, that's an interesting city because that was the capital of the Inca Empire at one time. And we went on up to Machu Picchu. And when we were in Machu Picchu, found a fossil. I should have brought it with me. It's about that long. A fish fossil that you find 12, 14,000 feet up in the Andes Mountains. How do evolutionists explain something like that? The explanation is obvious. The Bible says the water covered all the high mountains in Noah's flood. A real simple answer for that matter. But there's all kinds of little inconsistencies like that. I always like to say, explain that one. How does that fit? And the inconsistencies can be explained by the Bible. I will make one more comment about that. If the Bible doesn't give us the answer, we either haven't studied the Bible enough, all the scripture that deals with that particular subject, or maybe God didn't intend for us to know the answer to that. Because he certainly says in his word that he's given us everything we need to live a life that is honoring and pleasing to the creator of the universe for the purpose that he created us for. Thank you.